Welcome, my name is Fabian, and in the following I'm going to show you how to map Horizon solution dependencies. When we talk in the logical design about dependencies, we need to understand which components we are using. We talked about that before. So if we focus on the management block, we have a lot of Horizon components in place that have certain dependencies that might rely on certain departments on an organization. For example, we want to use the vCenter server. We want to install the connection server. We want to use the Horizon View Composer to fulfill certain requirements. So we need to understand, first of all, which operating system dependencies do we have for those components. The vCenter server itself can be either installed as a Windows Server application, which is deprecated nowadays, or can be used, which is recommended, as a virtual Linux-based appliance. The connection server is a Windows-based installation component. So we need to install the connection server on Windows. The same counts for the Horizon View Composer and the security server. So both of them are installed within a Windows Server component. The Unified Access Gateway, if we want to give access over an unsecure network, is delivered as a virtual appliance. So we don't need to take care about any kind of licensing here. That is part of the Horizon component model. And the same counts for vRealize Operations Manager. We can use it as a virtual appliance or either install it on Linux, depending on our preferred installation option. The NSX Manager is a virtual appliance. And last but not least, the App Volumes Manager must be installed on Windows. So why do we need to identify those dependencies? Because we need to make sure we have the components in place. We need to make sure that we have the proper license in place. So we need to build that up into our logical design. And for sure, there are some components that also needs to be joined to an Active Directory to work properly. Connection server, App Volumes Manager, Horizon View Composer, those are components where we need integration with the Active Directory. At this point of the logical design, we probably don't really need to know which exact permissions do we need for certain users. That's what we define in the physical design. But we need to create this awareness in this part of the project. We need to find the proper organizations within a company that help us to fulfill those requirements. Besides the requirement of an operating system, we also might have components that require a database. So we have components where we require a database. That might be the vCenter server, especially when we install it on a Windows base, which is deprecated, but that's where we might use an external database, like an Oracle, like a Microsoft SQL Server. If we use the Horizon View Composer, we need an external database. If we use the Horizon 7 connection server, we need a database in case we want to persistently store all kind of events. So the, let's say, connection server critical data is stored internally in an Active Directory lightweight database service. But all kind of events, if we want to store them persistently, we need to connect the connection server to an event database. The App Volume Manager needs a SQL database and supports Microsoft only. Also a very important point at this point in time when we create a logic design, since we need to create this dependency. If we want to have high availability, we need multiple App Volume server, we need a high available SQL server in place within the organization. And last but not least, the Identity Manager. If we want to use the Identity Manager, we can either use an embedded database or an external database. This design decision really depends on the availability definition or the availability we want to achieve with our solution. Important for every version, please check the actual product interoperability matrix, which really specifies which databases, which configuration setup is supported for our Horizon environment and the specific component. We have talked about Active Directory before. We have a lot of components that interact tightly with Active Directory. Our virtual desktops must be joined to the Active Directory. Our remote desktop session host must be joined to the Active Directory. Connection server, Composer, those are all components that are part of the Active Directory and that allows our users, the users of a certain domain, to access the environment, to manage the environment. Yeah, and we need to analyze also the logical design part. How is the Active Directory infrastructure built up at the customer side? We need to figure out, do we have multiple domains, multiple forests? Maybe we need to create trust relationships so that users from a different domain are able to access the virtual desktop of a different domain. So those are things we need to identify early on, because that might require longer term changes within, or have more complex changes within the organization that might require some time. And therefore, we need to make sure that we identify and define those topics early when we create such a solution like a virtual desktop infrastructure platform.